So, the greatest jobs program that the Founding Fathers bequeathed to us is the First Amendment. Now tell me why. As we reflect upon the conclusion of African American History Month, and as someone who existentially is in Congress today as a result of the nation's struggle to make our country better, a unique group of people in the Constitution whose freedom came from the Constitution, why we should not, with high unemployment, look to our Constitution for the answer. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the answer to long-term unemployment is actually in the Constitution of the United States. Well, let me say that a little differently. It's not in the Constitution of the United States. It should be in the Constitution of the United States, and one of these days we're going to get there. But I want to bring to the House's attention an important speech delivered by our President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. President Roosevelt said on January 11, 1944, from that microphone and that platform, "It is our duty now to begin to lay plans and determine the strategy for winning a lasting peace and the establishment of an American standard of living higher than ever known before." He says we cannot be content, no matter how high the general standard of living may be, if some fraction of our people, whether it be 1/3, 1/5, or 1/10, is ill-fed, ill-clothed, ill-housed, and insecure. This republic had at its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable rights, among them freedom of speech. Even Roosevelt is acknowledging that 50% of all jobs in 1944 come from freedom of speech, freedom of worship, trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. They were our rights, Mr. Roosevelt says, to life and liberty. As our nation, he continues, has grown in stature, however, as our industrial economy has expanded, these political rights proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men, our president says, are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. And in these economic truths, we've come to accept them as self-evident. We've come to accept, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station, race, or creed. So what does Roosevelt do? In July 11th, the only president who's ever had to confront unemployment at the level that we are confronting it right now, you know what he does, Mr. Speaker? He turns to the Constitution of the United States. And he says these are the things we need to add. If the First Amendment can guarantee us 51% of all jobs, and from it can come iPod and laptops and the internet and unprecedented economic growth, he says we need to add to the Constitution the right to a family to have a decent home. What would that do for home construction in this nation? What would that do for millions of unemployed people? He says we need to add to the Constitution the right to medical care. How many doctors would such a right create? He says we need to add to the Constitution of the United States the right to a decent education for every American. How many schools would such a right build from Maine to California? How many people would be put to work building roofs and designing classrooms and providing every student with an iPod and a laptop? How many ghettos and barrios will actually be touched by such an amendment? In fact, very little that we pass in the Congress of the United States even touches the long-term unemployed. Only thing that touches them that this Congress has access to that can actually change their station in life is the Constitution of the United States. So Roosevelt concludes, after this war is won, he's talking about World War II, we must be prepared to move forward, he says, in the implementation of these rights to new goals of happiness and well-being. America's own rightful place in the world depends in large part upon how fully these and similar rights have been carried into practice, Mr. Speaker, by our citizens. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's 50, 60, 70 years ago. And here we are today trying to pass legislation talking about austerity in government rather than taking the advice from the greatest capitalists in the history of our world, who set our freedom system in motion in 1776. That freedom system is responsible for the present America. Mr. Speaker, there's an even greater America that's in front of us. It's the America that adds to our founding document these basic rights, not at one time, but one at a time. And the way out of this economic and fiscal disaster that our country confronts isn't to cut the poor and to leave them on the streets. It isn't to ignore unemployed people. The way to change this crisis is to give the American people one more reason to believe in America again, that 308 million people can coalesce, wipe out unemployment once and for all, rebuild our union, strengthen it, and change the direction of America forever. I thank the Speaker, and I thank the American people for this time.